This part of the crypto cycle is a lot like journeying through a very dark and ominous tunnel. We know about the previous crypto cycles. We know what happened. We know the history. So we think we know where this tunnel's going because we've been down it before. If you've been through other crypto cycles, you know what happened in the past. But at the same time, no one really knows what's going to happen. This is crypto and these are markets. No one really knows what's going to happen tomorrow in crypto or tomorrow in any real market. So we keep journeying down this dark and ominous tunnel. And every time we come around a corner, off in the distance, we think we might see the light at the end of the tunnel. But there are a lot of dark sections before we get to that light, before we get to that sunny part. And around every corner, we seem to turn and see something that looks like it could be a monster of some type, something that will destroy all of our hopes and dreams. Is it going to be a recession? Is it going to be regulation? Is my chosen crypto, in the case for most of us, at least watching this, is my Cardano not going to be embraced by the current administration? Is it going to be left out in the cold? Are we going to go back down to 40 cents, to 30 cents, to 20 cents, to 10 cents, to 3 cents? Could this be the end? Are we already back in a bear market? Do I have to wait another 4 years? There are a lot of potential monsters lurking around the corners in this dark tunnel. However, everyone has a choice. When they see these dangers lurking up ahead, they can bail. They can turn around and go back the way they came. They can bail on the whole tunnel journey. They can forget about the light at the end of the tunnel. They can just bail, get out of there, move on with their life. That's one choice. And everyone gets to make their own decision. But for everybody else who continues on, who continues down the tunnel, what we seem to find, and this has happened again and again in crypto, what we seem to find is the closer we get to these monsters lurking in the shadows, every single time they look really scary. It looks like a monster. You see the fangs, you see the claws, and you get up close to it and you realize it is a monster, but it's a stone monster. It's a statue. It's a facsimile of the danger. It's a copy of the thing you were so afraid of. It looks like it from a distance. It really does look identical to the thing you were so afraid of, but you get close to it and you realize it's not really alive. It's there in form, but not in substance. And you can just quietly continue walking right past it. It doesn't eat you, it doesn't claw you. There are no fangs. It's just a stone monster. That's the position we find ourselves in right now. And the key, pretty much the only thing that matters in crypto, is lasting until the good times in crypto. And that requires that you not get shook out by these stone monsters. If you generally scoff at the thought of monsters and enjoy being alone in dark tunnels, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. I'm not going to lie, guys. We are definitely in that dark, gloomy, tumultuous part of the crypto cycle where everybody thinks the world is falling down around them. And this is probably amplified this cycle because of what happened in the US presidential election. We had one candidate not so pro crypto, another candidate who seemed to be fully embracing crypto. The crypto guy got elected, and all of a sudden we were off to the races. We saw big appreciation in price. Cardano got all the way up above $1.20. Everybody was like, we're off to the races. Here we go on the rocket ship to the moon. And by rocket ship to the moon, I mean, I'm going to be walking down the sidewalk and so many gold coins are going to be falling out of the sky. I'm just going to kind of pull open my pocket and my pants are going to get so heavy with those gold coins, I won't be able to walk. That's what everybody was sort of envisioning. They were like, Mr. Crypto President is now in the White House. Here we go. Nothing but up, up only. And that lasted for a second. And ever since then, it's been nothing but volatility and downward pressure. And here we are down in the 70s. And now everybody's asking, are we already in the bear market? Was that it? Was that the whole bull cycle? Is the 4-year cycle over? Are we just going back down now? Is this all we have to look forward to? The thing is, this is exactly what happens every single cycle. Every single cycle I've been in since 2013-ish has been like this. There's been this period when everybody in crypto, no matter what ecosystem they're in, thinks crypto is ending basically, or crypto is languishing, or the cycle ended early. Some flavor of those kinds of doomsday predictions. And just up front, let me say, I don't believe that anybody knows what's going to happen in any market, especially not the crypto market. But what we can say is that every single cycle, we seem to go through something just like this, where things are just going sideways, or maybe a little bit down, or a lot of volatility up and down, and everybody thinks the world is ending. This is why we always have these crazy counts where the mainstream media has decided that Bitcoin died, for like the 42nd time or whatever. I think the last number I saw was some incredible number of times that headlines in mainstream media said Bitcoin was dead. Bitcoin has died. This has happened so many times, and it's because the crypto cycle is this huge amount of volatility. The reason why everybody doesn't just, as a matter of course, get rich in crypto, because it's been pretty predictable. Every single cycle, crypto has shown its holders these incredible gains so far. So you have to ask yourself, why is it that not everybody's in crypto? Knowing what's happened over the last decade, how come every single person is not already in crypto? It's because it's a wild ride, and we go through periods like this. If we didn't go through periods like this, everybody would already be in crypto. If it was just up only all the time, everybody would already be in. But instead, in order to survive in crypto, to make it to those good times, you've got to go through this dark tunnel full of these monsters in the distance. You see the silhouette of a monster, and you don't know, is that a real monster who's going to dash all my hopes on the rocks? Or is this a stone monster? Is this not a real monster? Is this a statue that looks like a monster, but it's actually not a monster? I can just cruise right past it. That's kind of the phase we're in right now. And like I said, I don't really believe that anybody knows what's going to happen in the crypto markets. But every single time so far, we've gone through something like this, and everything's turned out okay. Everything's been great in crypto if you can just make it to the light at the end of the tunnel. And right now, I think what we're seeing, as much as sentiment is very gloomy right now, we're seeing some amazing history-making things happen. Like this, for instance. Here we have Senator Cynthia Lummis, one of crypto's greatest allies in Washington, reintroducing the US Bitcoin Act. The US Bitcoin Act is an especially big deal because it addresses the disappointment over this. This is the executive order Trump signed establishing the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve and United States Digital Asset Stockpile, which itself was a really big deal for Cardano because of the way this was initially announced. You probably remember this very exciting tweet from the president right here. He said a U.S. crypto reserve will elevate this critical industry after years of corrupt attacks by the Biden administration, which is why my executive order on digital assets directed the president's presidential working group to move forward on a crypto strategic reserve that includes XRP, Sol, and ADA. I will make sure that the U.S. is the crypto capital of the world. So this was very exciting for Cardano, especially because it just said XRP, Sol, and ADA and called it a crypto strategic reserve, which in my mind is what it should have been all along. I know a lot of people like to say Bitcoin is Bitcoin and the rest of crypto is crypto, but let's face it, it's all always been crypto. It should have been called a crypto strategic reserve as opposed to a Bitcoin strategic reserve and a US digital asset stockpile. Should have just been called what they were calling it at the start, right here, crypto strategic reserve. But then, of course, the legions of maximalists of Ethereum and Bitcoin made an appearance, and Trump had to follow up with this. And obviously, BTC and ETH, as other valuable cryptocurrencies, will be the heart of the reserve. I also love Bitcoin and Ethereum. I love the fact that Bitcoin and Ethereum were just an afterthought here. But the exciting part was XRP, Sol, and ADA. So, what everybody, not everybody, but what a lot of people were imagining was that this crypto strategic reserve would come into being, and then it would be directly on the rocket to the moon with the gold coins falling out of the sky into your pocket. It would be moon Lambo time if you were holding ADA. That's what a lot of people were thinking. And probably they were thinking on a very short time scale. They're thinking this would be something that would happen quickly, because this is some amazing news. Never in the history of crypto or Cardano did I imagine a sitting president of the United States coming out and saying, hey, I'm going to create a crypto strategic reserve, and ADA is going to be one of just a couple of assets in it. Sounds incredible. Everything we ever hoped for. Markets reacted accordingly. But then we all ran into a little problem, a little realization. That problem was that everybody was imagining this executive order was obviously going to involve the US government buying these assets, buying Bitcoin, buying Ethereum, buying Cardano. And obviously, in the minds of people thinking about this, that was going to have a very positive effect on the markets. Again, on the rocket to the moon. There was one big problem with this whole idea. Unfortunately for this whole concept, the US has separation of powers, and the executive branch does not have the power of the purse. You see, that money to buy all this Cardano and all this Bitcoin and Ethereum, Ether, that money had to come from somewhere. And the president doesn't have the power to just sort of pluck money out of the treasury and spend it on whatever he wants. The White House doesn't have that power. The executive branch does not have that power. That is the power of the purse, and the power of the purse belongs to the legislative branch. Congress has the power of the purse. Sure, the president can, do certain things with money that's already been appropriated, that Congress has already allocated to certain things. The president can make certain decisions when the money's already been appropriated. But the president can't wholesale come up with a new idea like, hey, we're going to have a crypto reserve, and then just grab money out of the treasury to pay for it. Congress has that power. So the actual executive order we got out of the White House said, hey, we're going to establish this Bitcoin reserve, this Bitcoin strategic reserve, and this US digital asset stockpile that, looked like Cardano was going to be a part of. But that is going to be formed from assets we already have. And David Sachs eventually told us they didn't even know if they had any Cardano. But the executive branch did not have the power to just grab money out of the treasury and buy a bunch of Cardano or a bunch of Bitcoin or any other assets. We were going to have to rely on Congress for that. And that is where our good friend, Senator Lummis, comes in with her US Bitcoin Act. So the 2025 Bitcoin Act, which is the one that she is introducing in that post right there, that is just a reintroduction of the 2024 US Bitcoin Act. So if we go back to the 2024 Bitcoin Act, we can see a good description here at congress.gov of exactly what that bill was going to do. And here you can see this bill provides for the acquisition and storage of the cryptocurrency Bitcoin by the US government. You notice the word acquisition, that's the important word there. They're not just going to continue storing like the executive order does, they're actually going to acquire new Bitcoin. The Department of the Treasury must purchase 1 million Bitcoin over a 5-year period and hold the Bitcoin in trust for the United States. All Bitcoin acquired under this bill must be held for at least 20 years unless used to retire outstanding federal debt. That is pretty excellent language if you are in crypto. It doesn't just say, "Hey, we're going to establish a crypto reserve and, we'll hold it for some indeterminate period of time." It says, "We're going to acquire 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years and we're going to hold it for at least 20 years unless we use it to pay off outstanding federal debt." Very, very good language if you are in crypto. This is the bill that she's reintroducing now in 2025. So this is sort of the best of all worlds for Bitcoin. This doesn't address the US digital asset stockpile that Cardano would be a part of. And we already know that David Sachs said he doesn't know if they have any Bitcoin or any Cardano. And here it is right from the Sachs's mouth.
People are wondering whether they're going to be included in this stockpile. Will they? Does the US own them? Why mention them by the president?
Well, the president just mentioned the top 5 cryptocurrencies by market cap. So I think people are just reading into this a little bit too much. He just mentioned the top 5. In terms of what we'll actually have, again, we have to do the accounting. We're not sure, sitting here today, whether the federal government owns any of these alternative cryptocurrencies. We know it owns Bitcoin.
So there you go. He's saying he knows they have Bitcoin, but he's not sure about these other coins like Cardano. So we've got Senator Lummis's efforts to get the US Bitcoin Act through. That would involve the US government buying Bitcoin on her schedule of 5 years and holding for 20 years unless they use it to retire debt. Then we've got the executive order that says, "Hey, we're going to hold on to assets in the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the US digital asset stockpile." But then we've got David Sachs saying, "We don't even know if we have any Cardano." He doesn't know if they have any of the other ones, XRP, Sol, ADA. He doesn't even know. They've got to do the accounting. So there's kind of a question mark there of the status of some of these other coins, ADA, Sol, XRP, because the White House doesn't even know if we own any. And the only governmental action right now that involves the US government actually buying crypto is the US Bitcoin Act that only applies to Bitcoin. So I know that turn of events doesn't sound quite as positive as this initial tweet did, but I mean, come on. This is the month, March 2025. This is the month when a sitting president of the United States started tweeting about Cardano. This would have been unthinkable just a couple of years ago. This wouldn't even have been possible with any previous administrations. It never even crossed my mind that the president of the United States would start tweeting about Cardano. This is a really momentous history-making event for Cardano. And we talked in a previous video about the trip that Charles and JJ made down to Florida. And, no surprise, knowing how persuasive Charles can be and how convincing his presentations are, no surprise that led to the president of the United States tweeting about Cardano. This really is a great time for all of crypto and for Cardano, but we're still also talking about the US government, and like all gigantic governments, gigantic bureaucracies, some of the one of the maybe the single largest organization in the entire world in terms of like the number of people involved, things move slowly. Even if we've got a Congress that's on board for crypto, we've got a White House that's on board for crypto, things are going to take some time. Things aren't going to happen overnight. How much ADA are we going to end up with in a US digital asset stockpile? Who knows? But also, who cares? The president of the United States is tweeting about Cardano. One of the big problems in crypto, the reason why it feels like we're always journeying through this very dark tunnel, we're on this Tolkien-esque quest to travel through the mountain, even though we know the mountain is dangerous. One of the problems in crypto is that we're paying a lot of attention. If you're in crypto, you're probably paying a lot of attention to everything that's happening on a very micro level. You're paying attention to every proclamation from the White House, everything that's going on in Congress. Not everybody in crypto, but a lot of us are paying attention to all these little things on a day-to-day basis. And so every little thing seems in our minds like it's going to make or break crypto. And we do have a lot of other wonderful things going on right now. In addition to the US Bitcoin Act, we've got Congress overturning the DeFi broker rule. We've got the Genius Act. We've got Cardano futures coming. We've got a lot of really wonderful things going on. But I think those are all sort of the short-term things that push those dopamine buttons in our brain. And really, there's a larger pattern in Cardano. The reason why you should feel safe and secure. Okay, maybe you shouldn't feel safe and secure ever in crypto. But one thing that might help you recognize the stone monsters versus the actual monsters lurking in the shadows is sort of the longer term pattern. And while I would say that I strongly don't agree with Raoul Pal on certain things, and a lot of people in Cardano in particular don't agree with him about certain things. He is certainly no fan of Cardano. He's not a part of our community, and he doesn't even seem to like Cardano. But I think he is right about one thing. There are probably only a few things that have been true in crypto throughout my experience in crypto, which is kind of coterminous with this chart that Raoul Pal posted. I kind of got into crypto in that 2013 time period, just before this chart starts in 2014. And one thing that I think he does have right is that crypto seems to have a lot in common with liquidity. Whether you measure liquidity, in terms of global liquidity, like it is here, in terms of M2, which is kind of a broad measure of money. You can Google M1, M2, M3 if you want to understand the difference between those measures of those money. But M2 is just sort of a broad measure of money with certain components. Whether you measure it that way or in terms of the Fed balance sheet, it seems like crypto does very well. There's a correlation. Crypto seems to do very well in times of high liquidity. And when liquidity shrinks, the crypto markets also experience, an impact from that diminished liquidity, as you can see from this chart. So one of the good things we have to look forward to, regardless of what happens with any of these bills, the US Bitcoin Act, the Genius Act, no matter what happens with Cardano futures, whether the DeFi broker rule was overturned by Congress or not, it was overturned by Congress, but all these little things, there will always be this next thing that's part of the growing narrative in crypto. But one thing that's been true is that when liquidity goes up, there is often a corresponding move in the crypto markets. And the Raoul Pal narrative is kind of that whoever is running the treasury is sort of like the world's biggest junk bond dealer. And the way it works in his narrative is that the head of the treasury basically has to go around and they have to refinance the debt because, as you're aware, if you've been watching the news at all, the US now has this crushing amount of debt service it has to pay. It has to pay interest on all these loans, all this debt that the US government has. And so it has to go around the world selling off more government instruments to get more to accumulate more debt to pay off the interest on the old debt, all of those kind of things, is that whole debt spiral. Part of the reason that Doge exists is because we simply spend way too much and we're accumulating more and more debt, and the interest on that debt is crushing us. But the way we're sort of kicking the can down the road all these years is that we're on this sort of 4-year debt cycle. We sort of had this, something akin to a debt, almost like a debt jubilee after the great financial crisis, where we had to rescue all of these very, very large global financial institutions. And this started this sort of 4-year cycle where every 4 years, according to this narrative, according to this Raoul Pal narrative, every 4 years, the head of the treasury has to go around selling the equivalent of the world's greatest junk bonds. And so what happens is you have the interest rates going up and up and up to control inflation and all these other things the Fed is very concerned about. But then when it's time to sell those bonds around the world, the interest rate must come down because the US does not want to take out debt at very, very high interest rates. It wants to take out debt at low interest rates when it's time to refinance all of that debt. So his theory is that we have this 4-year crypto cycle because it corresponds to the refinancing of that debt. And of course, that all, because the interest rates are going up and down, that all corresponds to liquidity. So if you think about it in those terms, you shouldn't, if you think that Raoul Pal is right, and I'm not saying he is, I'm just saying this is one of the narratives out there, and there's a certain amount of things underneath that narrative that make it, seem somewhat compelling. And if you believe in that narrative, there's something else that has always seemed to be true. And that's that no matter what president comes into the White House, even if they are one who is striving very, very hard to create the impression of austerity, like this whole Doge thing, this is all austerity. This is just like for US listeners, austerity is something that European governments talk about, discuss, and encounter quite often. For us, it's something new because we basically what happens is we just spend every single administration, whether the president in the administration is Republican or Democrat, they all just spend huge amounts and they always seem to outspend whoever and everyone who was previously in the White House. That's sort of been the modern history of the executive branch. And it seems to be the case that even if they come in and their whole platform was austerity, like, hey, we're going to cut back on government spending, no more waste, no more fraud. Even if they go to great lengths to create this impression that they're all about austerity, what always seems to happen in the end is that they just keep spending. They keep spending more and more and more and more. And along with that, what we have is this increase in liquidity. They just go crazy, and it's this decadent amount of spending no matter what. And it leads to all the things that underpin that lead to an increase in liquidity, which so far, if you believe in the Raoul Pal narrative, seems to be good for crypto, seems to lead to good times in crypto. And you can quibble with this. You can say, oh, that the correlation doesn't seem that tight to me. I believe this is all just coincidental. That's great. But if you believe in this narrative pushed by Raoul Pal and many others, and you also recognize the history of US governments, and that's that they always, always spend more, even if their platform was all about austerity, then those two beliefs existing at the same time would probably lead you to believe that this administration will also spend like crazy. Once they get done with all this austerity stuff, they'll also probably spend like crazy. There will be this increase in liquidity, like there has been, cyclically all these years. And that again will lead to the same end results, the same kinds of something directionally the same in the same direction as the cyclical end result we've seen in the past. So even if you're afraid on a day-to-day basis of this bill not passing, this regulation coming into effect, this thing not happening, Trump not delivering on this crypto promise or not on this one, all those little day-to-day things, those things, are just day to day. But this larger pattern, this 4-year crypto cycle, none of us really know. How long will it last? Will it last forever? Was the last cycle the last cycle? Are we already done with the cycle? Nobody really knows that. But the pattern so far has been that this cycle does exist. It seems to have some relationship to liquidity. And the history of US governments has been that they always, always, always spend like crazy, and liquidity always seems to go up. So as we journey through this dark, gloomy, ominous tunnel, hopefully that provides some level of comfort. I personally am just sort of trucking along under the assumption that everything is going to turn out fine this year, just like it has in all of the past cycles since 2013. I hope you all are looking forward to it as much as I am, and I'll talk to you soon.